Family Ties is a true crime podcast that focuses on the cases of children that have been killed or affected by the ravages of abuse, neglect, torture, assault, starvation, or any other crimes committed against children. Every day in the U.S., between 4 to 7 children die at the hands of parents, foster parents, or caretakers. That is an average of 2,000 children per year that die of totally preventable causes. We want to bring awareness to these crimes and uncover the effects and long-term damage that is a result of this national epidemic. We also discuss the ways we as a country need to change the broken system that is currently in place to protect children. The Family Ties is here to give voice to the voiceless and to challenge you all to take action in your own communities to demand better protection for our most vulnerable. Listener and viewer discretion is advised due to the explicit nature of the topics that we cover. Welcome back to the Family Ties podcast. Hi, you all. Kelly Ritchie here. Thank you for joining us today. Before we get started, I'd like to invite each and every one of you to subscribe to our YouTube channel, like our videos, and share your thoughts and comments with us. And for those of you listening to our podcast, please rate and subscribe wherever you find your pods. We welcome your feedback as well as your suggestions and case recommendations. So please post away. Today's case was recommended by listener watcher Becky P. And boy, guys, is it a rough one. The Family Ties brings you the case of 4-year-old Dominick Calhoun, who died April 12th of 2010 after having been beaten and tortured for days by his mother's boyfriend for having wet his pants while on their couch. This tragedy took place in Argentine Township, Michigan, a town that is reported as having a violent crime rate that averages 88% lower than the national average violent crime rate. This small township has relatively low crimes and an average population of less than 7,000. The perpetrator, 26-year-old Brandon Hayes, had only been dating and living with Corinne Baker, Dominick's mother, for around 6 months before things ended brutally for little Dominick. Over the course of 4 days, after wetting himself and on the couch, while on, the couch of the perpetrator here, he was systematically beaten by Brandon Hayes, who pummeled Dominick with fists and kicks on his arms, legs, and genitalia. Genesee County Prosecutor David Layton told CNN. Hayes also apparently burned the boy in the course of the torture. The knuckles across one hand were charred. Argentine Township Police Chief Dan Allen said, "I've been doing this a long time, and this is the worst case of child abuse I've ever seen," the police chief said. "In all respects, he was tortured." CNN reports Hayes' motivation for his savage multi-day attack on the boy was that the child had wet his pants, Layton said. It had happened before. Hayes also resented the child because his biological father wouldn't pay child support, Layton said. Dominick's mother, Corinne Baker, was present for at least some of the beating and tried to shield the boy from Hayes' aggression, authorities said. She tried to lay on top of the child to guard him against being beaten any further, but she was beaten in the process, stated the police chief. According to Allen, the sequence of events that led to the discovery of the abuse began when Corinne Baker's sister and several acquaintances came to the apartment to buy drugs from her boyfriend, Brandon Hayes. After seeing Dominick's condition, the sister alerted the boy's paternal grandfather, who in turn contacted authorities. When emergency responders entered the apartment on the afternoon of April 11th, Dominick was barely alive. EMS transferred him to Hurley Hospital in Flint, where he was pronounced brain dead. Cecilia Gingle, a clinical nurse practitioner in neurosurgery at Hurley Medical Center, testified that Dr. Jawad Shah opened Dominick's skull to help alleviate pressure in the boy's swollen brain, but Dominick's brain was too traumatized. "It spilled outside his skull," she said. "We could not help." Dominick died shortly after being removed from life support. Dominick died surrounded by family at the hospital on April 12, 2010, when life support was stopped. Shaw, who often interrupted himself as he struggled not to cry, stumbled to answer when asked by the assistant prosecutor to describe Dominick's condition. "Was there anything you could do to save his life?" Assistant Prosecutor Tammy Phillips asked. as Shaw just shook his head no. I told the family there is no hope, Shaw said. Phillips asked Shaw to describe the force needed to cause Dominick's numerous injuries after pausing. He said, I cannot give you the brutal force that was involved, but clearly horrendous. Phillips asked a similar question of Dr. Gregory Dale Casey, who worked in Hurley's trauma unit, and he also struggled to answer as he described it as the worst case I've seen. Dominick's paternal grandfather, Rick Calhoun, tearfully testified that he was summoned to the apartment when Corinne Baker's sister called him. He said that the woman was frantic, but he was not allowed to testify as to what she told him due to court rules. The sister, Christine Baker, testified at an earlier hearing that she found Dominick battered and bruised when she visited her sister, whom she claims asked her not to call police. The paternal grandfather, Calhoun, said he pushed his way into Corinne Baker's apartment after Hayes answered his knock. He eventually found Dominick lying on a bedroom floor. He looked like he was asleep, said Calhoun, who burst into tears when the assistant prosecutor showed him a photograph of Dominick. He was moaning a little bit, Calhoun continued. He just looked like he was asleep, but I could tell he was in trouble because he had bruises on his face and his legs. Calhoun said he kneeled down and gave his grandson a kiss as he called 911. Calhoun said Corinne Baker indicated that Hayes beat the child. He also testified that Corinne Baker was not known to hit her children in the past. She never laid a hand on them. She was a yeller, he said. They also heard from Dr. Brian Hunter, a forensic pathologist who conducted the autopsy on Dominick. Hunter said his examination could not say who harmed Dominick, but his testimony about the boy's injuries was compelling, and the pre-autopsy photographs, which were shown to the jury, left many in the courtroom's audience wiping tears. Hayes showed no emotion when he turned his head to glance at the photographs of Dominick's injuries that were displayed on an overhead projector. There is such a massive number of injuries in this case, Hunter said, noting that he had stopped counting the injuries when he reached 100. Among Dominick's injuries were 2 teeth that had been torn from his mouth, hemorrhaging around his eyes. Hunter said, there were bruises and thermal injuries on Dominick's face, head, and hand. The bruising and thermal injuries in the groin area was a solid sheet of purple that Hunter said stretched from the boy's belly button to his penis and scrotum and wrapped 10 inches around his abdomen. This is just beyond overkill, but it's true. It just gets worse and worse. Thermal injuries, as defined by Medscape.com, can be divided into 6 different categories: chemical burns, electrical burns, fire-related burns, radiation burns, scalds, typically caused by steam or hot liquids, and contact burns. Dominick was beaten, tortured, and purposefully burned in such a brutal way that even health workers that see all kinds of wounds and accidents were emotionally scarred and had difficulty keeping it together during their testimonies. Unbelievable. I don't know how people deal with this and see this every day and try and take care of that child and try and save that child's life. A doctor described that bruising patterns as resembling someone wearing a swimsuit. This isn't just one injury, Hunter said. This is injury and injury and injury. On cross-examination, Piazza tried to get Hunter to identify the exact injury that contributed to Dominick's death, but the doctor said that wasn't possible, and I believe it. You can separate the severity, he said, noting that injuries to Dominick's brain, liver, hand were significant injuries. However, he noted, all of the injuries contributed to death. When you inflict this much trauma to the body, that can have a significant effect on the body, Hunter said. There was initial trouble related to gathering a jury pool in which hadn't already been affected by the news of this case. People had already formed very, very strong opinions, and so that jury pool was going to be very difficult locally. So the trial began in Port Huron in St. Clair County, but then it was moved back to Genesee County because a judge determined a fair jury for the highly publicized trial could not be found. The jury pool, which included approximately 100 people, was excused, and Brandon Hayes' trial was moved to Flint. The first testimony at Brandon's 2012 trial was grim. Tim Giagiello reports that the first responding officer, Argentine Township Officer Angelo Panos, testified that he found Dominick lying on the floor of the apartment in April 2010. He was summoned to the scene by Dominick's grandfather, Rick Calhoun. Officer Panos found Dominick with mother Corinne Baker. Dominic was breathing weakly and moaning with bruises on his body. He later died from his injuries. The surgeon who had been involved with trying to treat Dominic was emotional during the testimony. The surgeon offered graphic testimony to Dominic's condition while also holding back tears, according to the Detroit Free Press. "I can't count how many old and new bruises we found. It was from his scalp to the soles of his feet," said a Hurley Medical Center trauma physician who worked on Dominic. Having been charged with 10 counts, which include child neglect, torture, and murder, Brandon Hayes was sentenced to 100 to 150 years in prison for the brutal murder of 4-year-old Dominick Calhoun without any chance of parole. Good. Stay there, die there. I mean, I don't know what else to say about that guy. Tim Jagiello reports in an online article that the judge also sentenced Dominic's mother, Corinne Baker, who was 27 years old at the time, to 13 to 30 years in prison. She pleaded no contest to second-degree murder and second-degree child abuse in connection with Dominic's death. And police and prosecutors said she did not do enough to protect her young son from harm's way. That much seems obvious. CNN reported that the town police chief said that Baker and her son had been brought to the attention of Genesee County Department of Child Services on several occasions. The agency did not respond to CNN's request for comment. It was not immediately clear whether Baker's involvement with the Child Services Agency predated her relationship with Hayes. The police chief said he believed Baker and Hayes had been together for about 6 months. So Corinne had already been reported to Child Services on several occasions. I want to know more about these reports and what they were related to. Was it physical abuse, drug use, or neglect that she was reported for? I can personally understand the vitriol being thrown her way. She was aware at some level of the physical abuse and refused to protect her child, or was a part of the abuse herself. I think kind of those last two, refusing to protect the child and part of the abuse herself, I think those two are intrinsically linked, because if you see something happening and you refuse to act, I believe you become implicit. If I see someone being harmed, or an animal being harmed, or a child being harmed, and I allow it to continue without reporting it or doing something, I think at that point I'm also responsible for that life. So, ABC 7 News reports that the investigators said she had a number of opportunities to help her son and to help herself, but she did nothing. Investigators believe her boyfriend, Brandon Hayes, tortured and beat the 4-year-old boy over a period of 4 days, and that she refused help for him, even when a number of people suggested she get him to the hospital. On a forum called Missing Exploited Children, Adjudicated Cases on justiceforkaylee.org, I found out that Corinne has another child, Tyler. Tom Terrific 0420 writes that the parental rights of a former Tyrone Township woman has been terminated for her oldest child as she awaits trial in the murder of her 4-year-old son. Genesee County Family Court Judge Duncan Beagle ordered last week that 26-year-old Corinne Baker's parental rights be terminated in regard to her son Tyler. So this would have been all the way back in 2010. The 10-year-old, who has spent the last 14 months in foster care, was now available for permanent placement. Prosecutors said that while Baker didn't actually participate in the beatings, she didn't do enough to protect her son and is ultimately responsible for his death. I agree. Little Tyler was present during the beatings and testified at Hayes's district court preliminary hearing, while Hayes watched the testimony on closed-circuit TV from an adjacent room. Hayes's defense attorney has motioned that the boy testify again so that his client can face his accuser to comply with constitutional rights. Whatever. Corinne's older son, Tyler, testified in a quiet voice that he could not remember a lot of the details, but eventually said it was Hayes who had hurt him and Dominic, so he had been abused as well. When asked by the assistant prosecutor how Dominic appeared when he was taken to the ambulance, Tyler said he had bruises all over. When asked who put the bruises there, Tyler replied that it was Hayes. On the same forum, Mermaid55 shared an article from WXYZ, which stated that on April 12th of 2010, Corinne Baker woke up in jail. She was covered in bruises, her hair was matted with blood, and her eyes were nearly swollen shut. Argentine Township Police had arrested her while they investigated the torture and beating of her 4-year-old son, Dominick Calhoun. While she sat in a jail cell, her little boy died. She was released from jail for a short time before being charged with child abuse and second-degree murder. "The last thing I wanted was for my little boy to die," she said at the time. She said she had done everything she could to save her little boy from the brutal beating handed down by her boyfriend. She said Hayes was abusing drugs and flew into a rage when the child wet himself on the sofa in their Argentine Township apartment. Now, just pausing this for just a quick second from these details, I just want to know how people rush into a relationship, like not even being together or dating, like even a full year, like half of a year. They're living together. She's allowing this physical abuse to go on. I mean, what kind of state of mind do you have to be in to normalize that? I just don't understand. Corinne Baker defended her actions. She said she had screamed for help, but neighbors ignored her. She said she had fought Hayes, but he beat her. She said people saw what was happening to her and her son, but turned a blind eye. Well, including you as well, Corinne. 1 year, 4 months, and 19 days after her little boy's death, she stopped defending herself. The underlying theme was that she did too little, too late, said Argentine Township Police Chief Dan Allen. Police had presented to her evidence that she had opportunities to get help for her and her helpless son, but didn't. They presented witnesses who claimed Corinne said she didn't get her son medical help because she feared getting in trouble. She was on probation for a drug crime and was not supposed to associate with anyone with a criminal record. Her live-in boyfriend, Brandon Hayes, had a record. Baker's family members testified that she had opportunities to get help from them, but hid the fact that there was what would become deadly trouble in her home. She didn't intervene as a mother should, said Allen. Putting a timeline together of that weekend left her no wiggle room to get out of the charges. The case against her was strong. I agree. On Tuesday, August 30th of 2011, Corinne pleaded guilty as charged. The police officers who arrived at her apartment to find her son covered in bruises from his head to his toes couldn't help but wonder what was going through her mind as she emotionally faced the judge. "She was emotional," said Allen. "Was it because she was taking the plea? Was it remorse? Only she knows. We are one step closer to bringing justice to our grandson Dominic," said Martin Baker of his daughter's plea. So, I mean, even her family just is like disgusted with her, clearly. Corinne has told her own version of the story from behind bars to a very mixed reception from the public. My Fenton Times reports that Minister Laura Shubback Ouellette, formerly of Fenton, compiled, authored, and published a 184-page book. I just really wondered personally, how does something this tragic happen, said Ouellette, who began asking Baker about her life while Baker was in jail during the trial. You don't just get here all of a sudden. There's background. There's history. I agree. Originally titled, "I Didn't Kill My Baby," the public backlash was enough to make Ouellette change the title to "A Mother's Plea and Journey to Forgiveness." Ouellette is credited as ministering to Corinne at, during, and after Dominic's funeral and converting Baker to Christianity. How convenient. Ouellette's motive seemed pure in intent, but it should be noted that the angry reception comes from a public who thinks it is filled with Corinne's lies and not credible, which is also could be true. It's just coming from her perspective, but in situations like this, it's easy to see why the public outrage is so great that the only thing that matters at the moment is trying to get justice and punish those responsible. But at the heart of what Ouellette was trying to accomplish does not seem to be trying to excuse but to look deeper into how people get to the point in life where they perpetrate something like this upon the vulnerable. Mental health, trauma, and past abuse have become broad indicators of what creates perpetrators. The cycle goes viciously around and around. If we're not willing to look at those who have gone on to commit heinous acts and learn that we have to fix the broken cycle, or society will continue to churn out these perpetrators by creating them in the first place. We can never come to a solution for this epidemic if we don't face the facts. I believe that wholeheartedly. At 1 p.m. on Thursday, October 13th, the family of Dominick Calhoun and supporters of Dominick's Law held a rally in Lansing as a new bill was about to be introduced to the Michigan House of Representatives. The bill was introduced in memory of Dominick Calhoun, and supporters gathered on the front steps of the Capitol building. The bill was introduced in memory of Dominick Calhoun. The TC Times reports that on June 26th of 2012, Governor Rick Schneider signed legislation known as Dominick's Law, which strengthens penalties for child abuse in Michigan and adds penalties for when abuse is committed in front of another individual. This is the kind of sweeping change that I believe we need across this country. An excerpt from Dominick's Law dictates that rather than a prison sentence of no more than 15 years, one convicted of first-degree child abuse faces life or any term of years, but no less than 5 years. For a second or subsequent offense, a sentence of life would be any term of years, but not less than 10 years. Also included in Dominick's Law, it states that a person who commits child abuse in the presence of a child, other than the child who is the victim of the violation, is guilty of a felony, punishable by imprisonment for life or any term of years, but no less than 5 years. So I want to read you a letter from Dominick Calhoun's family. Dominick Richard Calhoun was a victim of child abuse in the most severe way. Our story begins on April 12th of 2010 when our family lost a son, grandson, nephew, brother, and friend. Our children only have us to rely on, so it is our duty to be the voice for those children that have none. If everyone from judges to child protective services had just done their job, this sweet child would still be with us. After Dominick's death, we started looking into the reason why we were let down by the system that is supposed to protect children from violent homes. After Dominick's death, Facebook pages came up in memory of Dominick. The two key pages were Justice for Dominick and Dominick's Law. Right from the beginning, we started getting support from families of other children that have gone through similar situations. As our sites grew in popularity, we started receiving inquiries from people asking us for help because no one would help them. I would personally speak with some of these people and cry over their situations. These many conversations drove our family to fight harder to change the way things work. I hear over and over how the courts, CPS, and other agencies turn these people away. The end result is children suffer. This has to stop. Ever since Dominick was taken from us, we have been busy trying to help local charities that help these very children that have been abused. In this journey, we have not been able to understand the magnitude of this very thing that took our Dominick from us. We then found out that existing laws to help these very children were in need of change. So we enlisted help from a wonderful lady who helped us with the first draft of what would become Dominick's Law. That's when we started contacting state representatives. At our first meeting, we were very happy with the turnout of people who wanted to help us. I could see that we were going to do something special here. Our law is now beginning to receive action. With Lansing's help, we will finally make this happen. Dominick did not have the chance to grow up, and we will not get to enjoy even one more of the beautiful moments of his life. If Dominick's Law had been in place, my grandson's killer would not have been on the street to begin with. There is so much more that needs to be done other than this law, but it is such a huge step. My family and so many others grieve and cry every day over what has happened to our children. I know from living this nightmare every day that this has to change. Dominick's Law points us in the right direction. Sincerely, the Calhoun family. I was extremely moved by that letter and felt it very important to include here because it says everything that I believe about this epidemic of child abuse and neglect, especially in the United States. So I want you to listen to that, and I want you to know that not just you and I, but we as a collective unit can change the world. We can change at least the laws in our states. We can demand that these laws get put in place to protect these kids. So just think on that, and just remember the power that you have with your voice and with your vote. Since Dominick's law was passed, MLive.com reports that a Flint mother and her boyfriend will both have lengthy stays in prison after they were the first people to be charged and convicted under a new state law that stiffened penalties for child abuse. In February of 2014, Alicia Ann Wyatt was sentenced to 5 to 10 years in prison for failure to report the abuse of her boyfriend, Robert L. Martin, that he was perpetrating against her son. Martin was sentenced to 14 to 21 years in prison after pleading no contest to first-degree child abuse and assault with intent to murder. Being sentenced under Dominick's law means that the law required that Alicia take action if she knew Martin was beating her child. MLive.com reports that Dominick's grandfather, Rick Calhoun, who founded the organization in honor of his grandchild that lobbied state lawmakers for stiffer penalties, said that Wyatt and Martin were the first two people in the state to be charged, convicted, and sentenced under the new law. "It's my grandson at work here," Calhoun said. "He's a protector." I would like for that to be how we remember little Dominick Calhoun, protecting other vulnerable children through a law passed in his honor. Let's make sure we do all we can do to get laws like this passed everywhere so that no other children have to die under such senseless cruelty and violence. Remember Dominick. And remember that there are so many others like Dominick that need our help. Do your part and reach out to your local governments to demand better laws to protect children in your community. We must speak and act on behalf of children everywhere. In the description and notes for this episode, for both the podcast listeners and the YouTube channel, I'm including links to the sources I used for today's episode. So if you kind of would like to check out more details and information about this case, please check those out. Also, I would really like to thank once again the recommendation for this case. I had never heard of it. And I want you guys to keep on recommending these cases so that we can bring to light the lives of these beautiful children. But thank you once again, Becky P. Thank you for this recommendation. It has been haunting me since I started reading into it. So, let's remember Dominick and let's not allow this loss to go wasted. We need to do something now. Thank you for joining us for today's episode. I urge you all to donate or join local causes in your communities that are working to fight for better children's rights. If you don't know where to start, please visit our website for resources and click on the donate page where we have links to some of our favorite child advocacy groups and programs such as NCAN and Child Abuse Now and the Coalition for Responsible Home Education. It is all of our responsibilities to stand up for the rights and lives of children everywhere. This is a fight that has nothing to do with partisan politics, simply the rights for all children to be safe, loved, and cared for. Thank you, and join the family.